Well, while you were doing that, you may be interested to know I just voted in the House of Commons. It's quite weird. Literally, I did. We've got about 4 votes this evening, starting just now. I went on what's called Members Hub and just voted. So that's the first time I was saying to Freddie and Sam that I've been on something like this and voted while I'm doing it. So I'm glad your connection's back, Freddie.
Okay, well, I don't know how far I got through the introduction that you could see, but as I say, Secretary of State for Energy and Climate Change, currently co-leader of the Liberal Democrats. As with all of our talks, please message me or Sam your questions, and we will put them to Ed once he's finished talking. So, Ed, you want to make some initial remarks?
Well, first of all, thank you very much for coming on. I hope you're surviving this bizarre time in our society, in our world. I've heard that you've been collecting money for Cambridge Women's Aid, so well done for that. I think it's really important we remember those people who are very vulnerable at this moment, and whether it's women suffering from domestic abuse, children who are very vulnerable, I think it's really important that we do our bit. So thank you for doing that. Let me talk very briefly about COVID and then very briefly about the party and where it's going, and then you can ask me questions. COVID's been really challenging for us, not just because we're talking to the world through a camera, but also because initially the view of the Liberal Democrat MPs, and it seemed to be shared by Labour and SNP, was that given coronavirus was not Boris's fault, it was a national effort and we had to come together. And so we pulled our punches and we took a view that we should follow the advice of the Chief Medical Officer, the Chief Scientific Advisor. We're a party who believes in evidence. And we hadn't got our own scientific team, although of course we were listening to the WHO and others, but we thought we needed to keep it with a degree of unity and not make party politics. That was frustrating, I have to tell you, because I was not happy with what they were doing and I thought they needed to be criticised. So the criticism we made were very gentle, very gentle. That sort of changed over the Easter bank holiday when it became increasingly clear that they were failing to deliver on what they promised, be it on things like testing, on PPE. You saw the nonsense of them not joining the EU procurement programme because an email went missing. And we just felt that we needed to be more upfront in our criticism, and you could sense a movement in the media. And so since then, we've gradually becoming a little bit more challenging and more critical. And while there's still definitely a need to make sure you're couching your contributions in a very constructive way, we are definitely getting on the front foot now. So we've done stuff like producing a package for NHS and care staff to campaign on, which went down quite well. I called for a public inquiry, not now, but to be pre-committed now. We've done stuff on the furlough scheme, the self-employed. Parts of the team have been doing things. Daisy Cooper's been doing a great job on the app. Manira Wilson's doing a fantastic job on the health and social care. Lady's been doing stuff on students and education. Sarah Olney's been doing stuff on transport. So we've all been pulling together. It's been frustrating getting media coverage. It's a bit easier now, we're being a bit more challenging of the government, but nevertheless it's still a bit tricky. And then you add in Keir Starmer, new person on the block, and that makes it a bit trickier. However, I don't know if you've seen much of what we've been doing, but I think we've begun to get more of a breakthrough. Clearly we're thinking about the impact of COVID on society, and then what happens post-COVID. And there's many impacts. The most worrying is the impact on people's life chances, and the impact particularly on not just the most vulnerable, but those who are more disadvantaged. So in my own constituency, we reckon there are about 600 families where the kids don't have access to Wi-Fi and then can't access home education. Just as one example. I've dealt with a lot of housing issues over the years. It's always been my biggest issue, and the amount of people in overcrowded accommodation I know is just way too high, and I can't imagine what it's like with if you're living with 3 kids in one room or 2 rooms. So I think there's some of those issues have come to the fore. I think the issue of the care sector is a massive issue here. I'd like to talk about caring during our discussion. The fact of that there's a lot of low pay there, that it always plays second fiddle to the NHS, where actually it has a critical role to play. So I think that's a big issue. And there's many others. We've seen the impact of so many people having insecure jobs in the labour market. We've seen the impact of how low our statutory sick pay is in this country. Many problems with the universal credit system. We've seen the impact of this technology we're using now. And obviously we've seen the dramatic impact on the economy, which is just huge and we should talk about. So lots of big impacts, which we're all aware of, but I think they could shape our politics going forward. So I've asked the Federal Policy Committee if we can really start thinking about it now, not by setting up a policy working group, which is a traditional way, but we have what I call member assemblies. You're probably familiar with the concept of citizens' assemblies, where people can get engaged and have proper deliberative debates about what things should happen about particular decisions. I'd like to see the party doing our policy a bit differently from how we've been doing it. While there's some strengths in the way we do it, there are also some weaknesses. And the biggest weakness is we're not engaging enough members. And we've got a massive membership now. We need to hold on to them. And I think we need to harvest their ideas and talent. So I'm hoping the Federal Policy Committee is going to run with this idea and have what I call members' assemblies, lots of debates, things on Zoom, maybe with speakers in, using different platforms like Slack and so on, to try to generate more debate. So the party's in a very good place coming out of COVID, dealing with all these issues. Let me talk about the future of the party then. There's no secret. The last election was an absolute disaster. The General Election Review, which I helped set up under Dorothy Thornhill, is reporting at the end of this week, and you as members should get copies of that election review. I've not seen it yet, but it's very independent, and I'm hoping it will be quite hard-hitting. Not actually just about the last election. I think the party's lost our way in a number of areas. I think we've got huge governance problems. I think we don't engage with members well. I've said that before. I think that our campaigning has been going in the wrong direction. And I think our messaging has been ill-advised in a number of areas, and the way we do market research for our messaging. So I want to see some quite radical changes, and I'm hoping the review will give the party HQ and the acting leader and whoever's going to be the future leader the permission to make some big changes to the party. And hopefully that will be part of the foundation. But more significantly, whatever happens about that, the key of any political party is the message. What are we for? What are we trying to say to people? And we all know our values, at least I hope we do, whether it's on internationalism, civil liberties, the importance of the environment, the importance of the individual, getting the best out of the individual. We know those liberal values. The real challenge is communicating them in a way that grabs people's attention, that can relate to them and their lives. Because this may be a huge surprise to you, but you guys are not representative of the British people. And I went to the other university, well, I won't insult you by naming it. We're not that representative in terms of our background, our education, and so on. And as I've experienced politics I've fought 7 elections, won 6, lost 1. When you're on the doorstep, when you're engaging with people, it's a dramatically different experience from the intellectual debate that we rightly have in the party. And the challenge, I think, of any political party is to ensure that it is talking about the issues that people really care about, but addressing them from the values and principles that you have. And I'm labouring this point a little bit because I think in recent years we've talked to ourselves too much and to a narrow group of the electorate, and not talked to a wide enough part of the electorate. And the classic example was the last election when we talked about one issue, Brexit, very important. I'm passionate about it. But in taking that position, we were saying to half the population, don't vote for us, because we weren't giving them any other reasons. And I think that was not very clever. So we've got to be relevant to people, but also, and this is probably the most important thing, I'll shut up after this, we need to make sure that our values and our brand, yes, it's relevant to people and up to date, but also it's part of who we are long term. So when I first joined the party, and I'm going back a long time now, I worked as the economics advisor to Paddy Ashdown. And Paddy was absolutely determined that the party would have a brand. He used to say he'd sell his grandmother for a brand image for the party. His grandmother had died, so it wasn't a problem. But he spoke up all about international values, civil liberties, and so on, but he focused on education and on the environment. And we really went to town on those issues. We kept talking about them. We came up with imaginative policies. And I was involved in developing the policy of a penny on income tax for education, which turned out to be our lead policy in 3 successive general elections. We banged on about it so much. And that got over to people that we cared about education and that we were the education party. And that brand that he developed, I think, has been squandered in recent years. And we've got to get back to communicating strong messages that are relevant to people, that give a sense of who we are. And I think education, environment, obviously climate change for me, really important. I think, though, we need to have a debate in the party about what else there should be. Maybe people think it's just those 2. They're really important. But I actually think social justice is critical. And as part of social justice, actually, I think the caring agenda, which I mentioned earlier, for me, I'm passionate about it. I think it's a way of dealing with some of the big issues, how we look after elderly people, people with mental health problems, physically disabled, appeals to lots of people, at a local government perspective. And I have to say, for me, it's very personal. My dad died when I was 4. My mum died when I was 15. I spent 3 years as a young teenager nursing my mother, who was terminally ill with cancer. So I was a young carer par excellence, as it were. And then, because my mum was an only child, I had to look after her mother when she was elderly and frail and in care homes, and then died. And now I have a son who's 12, who's can't walk or talk. So he's quite physically disabled, obviously. And so I do a lot of caring for him. And that life experience has shown me that the good side of things, the vital importance of the NHS, but it also has shown me that caring is not done as well, or is not as well valued. So I'd like us to be the party that has a social justice agenda, but also has an agenda where we show that we understand the importance of caring in so many people's lives. So I'm going to shut up there. There's so much more I'd like to say, but it's probably better use of our time together if I answer your questions. I hope that's given you a sense of where I'm coming and where I'd like to see the party go.
Thank you very much for that. I think I'll start on your idea of where the Liberal Democrats are and sort of why we exist. So as a Liberal Democrat, I often get asked, well, why don't you just join the X? And if it's a Labour member, they ask me, why don't you just join Labour? And if I'm a Tory I'm talking to, they ask me, well, why don't you just join the Tories? So are we still really a Liberal party? And if not, how do we recapture that? And if we are, how do we bring that to the fore?
We are a Liberal party. I mean, that is fundamental. I'm a Liberal, and that's Liberal on the economy. It's Liberal on social matters, on personal matters, on political matters. Liberalism should go through all of the ways we approach society. And we took a very liberal position on Brexit. We were internationalists. We believe in international cooperation. We always have. We always should. We want to be practical. We're prepared to intervene, and so we should. I think the position we've taken on the emergency bill on coronavirus, I spoke in the second reading debate. I made it very clear that it was extraordinarily difficult for Liberal Democrats to back this bill, and we argued and put amendments down that it should be reviewed every 3 months. Bear in mind, the government wanted originally to review it every 2 years, and there was some view that it should be down to 6 months, and it eventually came down to 6 months. But we were the ones saying this is such a draconian power; it has to be reviewed very, very regularly. I mean, I could take you through, lots of things we've done recently and over the years where we have been the champions of liberalism, and we exist for that. But I just want to say this because this is just so important as we plan the future. You cannot win elections, particularly under first past the post, in just being ultra liberal. In my constituency, I don't know how many ultra liberals or wider liberals there are. Maybe it's 20% of the population. You ain't going to win on 20%. And I'm in a more liberal area. I know Cambridge is probably more liberal than that, but still it's maybe 30% in Cambridge. I don't know. So you have to widen out. Now, some of that you can do by squeezing the third party. So here we squeeze Labour Party. Other aspects are you've got to be a great candidate. You've got to represent people. You've got to work hard, take up their local issues. But you then need some other messages which, as I say, come from the liberal tradition, but are more relevant to people's lives. Can you hear a bell? Did you hear a bell then?
Yes, we can.
That means I've got to go and vote. But I can but because we're on Zoom, I can vote while you talk to me. So I've finished answering your question, Freddie. So keep talking to me while I vote.
So I think Hannah, who actually originally prompted that, sort of had a follow-up, which was, is there a risk where we could lose some of it, or more accurately, how do we turn the members that we gained in the Brexit debate, the members who joined us because we were so strong on Brexit and so internationalist, and the other two parties weren't, how do we turn them into lifelong Liberal Democrat members? How do we engage them properly?
Well, I mean, my experience is when I've spoken to lots of those people who joined us over the last few years and because of Brexit, when they get to know the party, I think they feel quite comfortable. And whether they come from the Tory tradition or the Labour tradition, I felt, I mean, do challenge this, I felt they've been pretty comfortable with our position on the economy, on social issues and so on. I won't say that's for everybody. I mean, I've had few members here who really don't like our position on things like drugs, or they're not that interested in social justice. But they're the tiny minority. I actually think the real challenge of keeping those members is, first of all, making sure that they recognise that we care about their views and find new ways to engage them. I think membership engagement over many years has been poor in the party. And if we're going to keep this new generation of members, we've got to involve members more. But the other thing, to be brutally honest, we've got to win. I mean, people join winning parties. A lot of them joined us because they want to be part of a winning movement to stop Brexit. Now, didn't do that. So we've got to show that we're a winning movement that's still true to our pro-European internationalist views, but also has others as well. So I don't think there's not a one-size-fits-all answer to that. It can't be. But I think being ambitious, being willing to reform the party. I mean, I'll finish just one point. I've engaged with a lot of the people who've given money to the party, the big donors, and they're still with us. But they're not just going to keep writing checks unless they think we're going to learn the lessons from the last election. And I think some of them who wrote big checks last time were saying, why would we do that again? You guys wasted it. And you don't have to be a big donor to have that view. You know, I've joined your party in order to fight Brexit. You messed that up. You didn't do that. And, you know, where are you going? So we've got to convince those people that we mean business, that we're going to reform ourselves, that we're going to win. We have a plan, and it's not going to happen overnight. I mean, you know, I joined the party when we had 4% in opinion polls. And I've been here many times over the times I've been in parties. You can't worry about a particular moment in time, but you've got to have a plan. and it's got to be credible. And I think I know what that needs to be, and I'm keen to persuade the party and also listen to the party about how we take that forward. I think the general election review, by the way, is going to be a very important moment in that.
Thank you very much for that. I'd like to ask a bit about your own record in government. What are you most proud of achieving during your time in government?
Well, it's definitely on the climate change agenda. There are a few other things I wouldn't mind talking about, but the climate change agenda stands out. And there were two parts of that I'm particularly proud of. One is the big increase in renewable power, and in particular, helping to make Britain the world leader in offshore wind. And creating a policy framework which has seen the cost, by using market forces with good, sensible government intervention, has seen the cost fall dramatically. That wasn't a given. The Tories fought me all the way. I'd had to really have a massive battle with George Osborne, Eric Pickles, Owen Paterson, even Number 10 at times, although Cameron was a bit more supportive. And we waged a real battle in government, and we won. And they didn't want renewables to come down in price, because Osborne had very big fossil fuel interests. He talked to Nigel Lawson all the time, but we won. And so I'm very proud of that. And the example is that the first contract I signed for a big wind farm, the electricity we were purchasing for the future was £140 per megawatt hour, the unit of electricity. And that was way above the wholesale price. But we brought in this system of auctions, competition for these contracts for difference. And by the second auction, the price had come down. I think it was maybe the third auction, it had come down to under £40. So from 140 to under 40, below the wholesale price, within 6 years. Now I'm pretty proud of that, and I'm particularly proud that we can say we delivered on that green agenda. The other thing I'm most proud of is the work we did internationally, primarily at the European Union, but also then at the United Nations. So I used to go as the government minister to the European Council on Energy, the European Council on the Environment. In fact, one of my claims to fame is I've been on as a minister on more European councils than any Liberal Democrat in history. And during this time as climate change minister, energy minister, I created a group which I called the Green Growth Group, because I knew Europe had to set and agree some really stretching climate change targets. And it wasn't going to happen without some leadership. And Germany was in a poor place, France was in a poor place, Italy, Spain. So we were one of the only big countries who could deliver this. And through this Green Growth Group, which I called my climate diplomacy, we managed to steer the council and then got the heads of state to agree a much more ambitious target on greenhouse gas reductions than anyone thought possible. And that then impacted on opinion in Washington and in Beijing, and the Americans and the Chinese moved far quicker than anyone expected. And then that led into the Paris 2015 treaty, which was far more ambitious than people had expected. So that international stuff I'm very proud of. So there are other things, but they were the two big things. And given that I came into politics partly because of the environment, that was important to me.
And in terms of the future of environmental policy and climate change activism, what do you think will be the effect of the pandemic on future considerations about the environment?
Pretty big, actually, for two reasons. First of all, I think there's increasing consensus that we're going to have to get out of this with a very growth-oriented strategy, but that growth shouldn't be business as usual, but should be zero/low carbon growth. And I can't remember a time when there's been that sort of consensus. And while I don't trust anything Boris Johnson says, and I advise you never ever to trust a thing he says, I do think there is enough push within government to actually make that happen. So, and we need to contribute that and push that and get them to go further and faster than they otherwise would do. So I think this recovery design of it, the design of the next stage of growth, is really important. I then think there are quite a number of other things that you would mash up in this. There's a great awareness of nature. I think there's the use of different technologies. I mean, clearly, the simplest thing is how we travel around. We need to make a lot more progress on green transport, but reducing the demand for transport is not a bad thing. And if people aren't having to travel, particularly flying to places, I think that could make a big difference. And you know, the airline industry knows it's in trouble, short, medium, and long term. You know, we're not shouting about it at the moment because I think it would not go down well with people whose jobs are on the line. But there's not going to be a third runway at Heathrow. It's just not going to happen. And the demand for long-term demand for air travel is going to be lower because people can do business on this stuff. I think that's great. So there are some long-term, there's probably more. You may have some other ideas. They're the two things that strike me the most.
Will we, you mentioned leadership and how it was important we showed leadership on the climate debate. Will our party suffer over the next year or however long it takes without having a confirmed, fully fledged leader of the party?
Yes. There's no doubt being the acting leader is quite tricky because you don't have the legitimacy of having been elected to be able to make decisions, to be able to take the party in the way that you want to and engage with the party in the way that you want to. And I found it frustrating. And while I've got every respect for the federal board who made the decision to postpone the leadership election till next May, so we wouldn't have a new leader announced till next July, I was both gobsmacked by that decision because it wasn't on any of the recommendations. It apparently came up through the meeting. And I've been quite frustrated by it. And I think it's fair to say all MPs and all leadership candidates, potential leadership candidates, share that view. Now it's the federal board that runs the party, and they're meeting next week to look at that decision. Whether they will just say no, we're leaving it till next year, whether they will decide some criteria for when they think it will be okay to have a leadership election or make a date, I don't know. It'll be up to them. I'm absolutely clear that the leadership election needs to take place this year at the very least. And it's up to them to make the final decisions. The exact dates, I mean, it would be completely inappropriate for someone who may be a candidate to get involved in that. But I do think it needs to be earlier. There is a real balance to strike. I think if we did it in the middle of this crisis, I think that the optics of that would look very poor. But I think if there was a second wave, if we'd kept out of it during the first wave, and we set up a clear timetable for doing it online, I think people would be fine with that, and we could do that.
You mentioned that it's very tricky for us to get any media coverage, especially now. But how do we as a party improve that? How do we, you've talked about having a message, but how do we then get our surrogates on the air actually spreading that message?
Oh, there's loads of different techniques and they change over the years, but there's still the same ingredients. You've got to have an interesting thing to say that's well researched and say it in an interesting way. And you can cut through. You have to be quite imaginative. By the way, it has always been like this, right? I remember when I was working as economics advisor, it was during the first Gulf War, and Paddy Ashdown, who was always trying to get media, made us sleep in the Commons overnight, watching what was then a real new development, 24-hour TV. And if something happened over in the Gulf War, we had to phone him up so he could get onto Sky TV at 3 a.m. in the morning. I'll tell you that anecdote because it's been a constant battle over the years. And, you know, now we've got a big battle. It's worse now because A, the government's got a big majority. B, there's no issue like Brexit. C, COVID makes it actually more difficult. And we're also the fourth party, so we don't get guaranteed speaking rights, and the BBC Charter doesn't say they need to cover us. So it's probably more challenging than ever. But that's why you have to come up with clever initiatives and take moments. So, you know, I mentioned before the NHS and care staff package, the public inquiry, our position on the furlough scheme, self-employment, where we've carved out a niche. There's the sort of things you've got to do. So you've got to be fleet of foot and employ really good staff. Staff are really important. So, you know, that's what it's about, fighting for airtime. And one's just got to be realistic about how much you're going to get and how you're going to get it.
Now, related to that, I think, so 2 days ago marked the 10-year anniversary of the Cameron-Clegg coalition. So I suppose two questions. Firstly, how much do you think media coverage allowed us to be in a position where we could share in government? And second, I suppose, if you had a time machine, would you go back 10 years and 2 days and prevent the coalition from being agreed upon?
The media coverage, just to check what you asked, how did media coverage get us into government? You think, is that what you're saying?
Yes. How did the conventional narrative seems to be that Clegg tapped into something, became a popular figure. And
oh yeah, some of that conventional narrative is actually needs to be unpacked. And Nick would say this himself. In the run-up to 2010, we weren't getting a lot of coverage in the run-up. Nick tells his story of how he would go. He'd been leader for 2 years. He'd go down a high street campaigning in whatever constituency, and the local newspaper had always played the same trick. They'd come up to him for an interview and they said, "Mr. Clegg, we've shown your picture to 10 people in this high street and no one knows who you are." And that was his classic anecdote to show that he hadn't cut through in the media at all. Now, he did cut through in the general election campaign. Remember, in the general election campaign, a law kicks in called the Representation of the People's Act, which guarantees us a bit more time. And they have to cover us to an extent. And also, he had the huge advantage, which they will never let us have give us again, of being in a three-way leaders debate. And he performed brilliantly. And that created this sort of Cleggmania during a very short period, which I think helped us. We didn't get an amazing result. We went back compared to 2005, but we didn't do too badly. So I don't actually think our result was about long-term media coverage in the run-up to 2010. I think it was about that election campaign and the fact we had that leaders debate. That was crucial. Would I change the coalition? Well, this is something I haven't said very much, and you may be surprised and may not even like what I'm about to say. During the 5 days of coalition negotiations, it was obvious to me that we needed to talk to the Labour Party to see whether we could do a deal with the Labour Party. Why did I think that? Because they've been defeated. I thought that because, A, I thought that we were more likely to get political reform with the Labour Party. B, I thought some of our agenda would be easier to push forward. And C, really importantly, if the Tories knew we were talking to the Labour Party, they'd give us more in the deal they were offering, which is exactly what happened. And we got a little bit more out of them because they knew we were talking to the Labour Party. The problem was the Labour Party was so tired and disorganised and hopeless. You know, they wouldn't agree with our view that we needed to scrap ID cards. They wouldn't agree with our position against the third runway. And so it became very clear that doing a coalition with the Labour Party was just not going to happen. And indeed, I remember waking up, I think it was on the 4th day maybe on the fifth day, but later in the negotiations, to listen to David Blunkett saying we were harlots and we should do no deal with the Liberal Democrats from the Labour perspective. And that was the moment when we had to clinch the deal, if we were going to do a deal, because the clearer it became that Labour were not going to do a deal with us, the less we get from the Tories. So it was a live negotiation. I think we were right to pursue it. I think we were right to continue. I think it was right for the country. I think we got a good deal out of the Tories. We did amazing things, on mental health, same-sex marriage, a pupil premium for disadvantaged kids, renewable energy, climate change, lots of great Liberal achievements. And I wouldn't want to stop that. I'm really proud of what we achieved, really proud. And I just want to apologise for the coalition. I think we made mistakes. Of course, you made mistakes. That's hardly surprising. Some mistakes should have been avoided, particularly on the politics and the presentation. But I'm deeply proud of what we did.
Should we have ended the coalition after we lost the AV referendum?
No, it would have lacked all credibility. We would have been seen to be in it just for ourselves, for our agenda, and we would have been saying, well, the British people didn't vote the way we liked, and therefore we were stamping off. I think that would have been a disaster. What I think we should have done, and I said this at the time, we should have been clearly a bit tougher with them, and more importantly than that, we should have shown publicly how much we were defeating them and stopping them, and we should have been proud of that. And Nick had the view that if we had done that, the coalition wouldn't have worked as well. I just think he was wrong on that. Not in the first year, because I think you had to do that in the first year. I think as time went on, we needed to show that we had a very separate identity, and we needed to carve out a very clear, distinct identity. In my view, as an anti-establishment party. But Nick found it difficult to say those words, and he always, and he's a good friend, and I admire him a lot. So don't take this as criticism personally. But he I think defines him much more himself as a centrist politician. I'm a bit more sort of, I would say, both progressive and a bit more radical on the traditional Liberal tradition, I would want that identity to have come out more from 2012 onwards, and I think that would have helped us. Ask the next question, but I've got to go and vote again, so keep going.
So I was wondering if you could expand potentially a bit more on elections. So, obviously the review's coming out in 2019, but at the end of the week, but perhaps what you personally thought went so wrong in the 2019 election. So some of us in Cambridge saw what we thought to be a very, very good local campaign, if not hindered, certainly not helped by the national campaign. And I think that may have been replicated in other seats. So I was wondering if you could talk about that and how we more generally win as a third or fourth party under first past the post.
Oh, those are big questions. Let me just deal with the general election first. The review will give you, I hope, and give us all, a real evidence-based, factual analysis, because wherever you were in the party, whatever you were campaigning, inevitably just saw a bit of it. So I hope the review will just be very thorough. And when I was helping write the remit for the review, what I tried to do was also make sure that 2019 was seen in the context of 2017 and 2015, because we've had 3 bad elections on the trot. And I think, therefore, there's a story there that needs unpicking. So I think there were short-term problems as well as long-term problems to electoral reformers. In short term, there's no doubt, I think, we played the Brexit issue wrongly. I said at the last leadership election that we needed to reach out to Leave voters while being proudly Remain. What I tried to explain to people was, if you just say you're not interested in half of the electorate, then guess what? They ain't going to vote for you. And you have to give them the reason for voting for you. In so many constituencies, I think if we'd had, a second or a third strong argument alongside our unequivocal position on being a Remain party, wanting a second referendum, I think we would have done a lot better. I don't know how many more seats we would have won. I think we would have maybe 10, 15, would have been very significant. But so I think we definitely played that wrong. Now, having said that, I didn't oppose revoke. I wasn't very keen on revoke, but I didn't, hands up, I didn't go out and speak out against it. I was in a difficult position because I'd just been defeated by Jo in the leadership election, and I think it would have undermined her very badly if I had done. And I actually believe in loyalty, and I don't think dividing the party as I would have done would have been very helpful to us electorally either. And you can make your mind up about how Jo performed. She's a very brave woman and a very intelligent woman. And whatever the election review says about her, I hope it will pay credit to her as well. The longer term issues, though, of why we did badly, I think are ones I want to focus on. I think our governance of the party, as I said before, has gone awry. We have this federal board with 43 people. Now, I've been on boards in private companies, in charities, in public sector bodies, in the voluntary sector. I've never been on a board with more than 15 people. I just do not know how you can manage a board with 43 people. That's just one example of the governance. We've got to change that. But more significantly is the campaigning. Because you can have good campaigns on the ground, as I'm sure you did in Cambridge. But some of the national campaigning that goes on now undermines the local campaign. I'm not talking about, the big air war messages, but I found the leaflets coming from the national party undermined our local messages. Our local leaflets were so much better than the national leaflets. They're more targeted, they're more relevant, they understood the constituency, and you'd work very hard, you spend money, you did your shoe leather to get that local leaflet about your candidate through the door, and then the national party would have paid the Royal Mail to deliver a letter or an envelope or a leaflet right on top of yours on the same day, undermining the value of your campaign. It was a huge mistake. And one of the reasons I feel so passionate about this, and this may seem a bit techie for some taste, but after the 2017 election, I made this point to the campaign department, as did Alistair Carmichael, our chief whip. But Alistair did it in a more amusing way than me. He told this story, how in the 2017 election, he would go to the delivery office of Royal Mail in Orkney and Shetland. And he'd say, if you have any leaflets from the National Liberal Democrats, please put them aside and give them to me. And he would take them in his car and he'd put them in his garage. And he'd refuse to have them delivered. Now, that says an awful lot, does it not? If someone as experienced as Alistair was literally stopping the national leaflets going out, I think that's valuable. And they didn't learn the lesson from what Alistair and I were saying after 2017. So I'll shut up now. But all I want to get over to you is, yes, there were short-term issues on messaging, but there's these long-term issues that we've got to put right as well, because they were responsible for a poor performance in 2015 and 2017.
So at PMQs earlier today, you asked the Prime Minister a question about government furlough schemes for self-employed.
Yeah.
So first, I'd like to ask, were you satisfied with his answer? And second, more generally, and this is a question from Joshan, what would a sort of Lib Dem government have done differently about coronavirus to what we're seeing now?
Okay. Well, on the self-employment, I was not happy. I mean, he obviously tried to have a joke at my expense, but actually that's backfired on social media. A lot of people who were supporting what I was saying, and because we've done a lot on self-employment, and there's a lot of self-employed people who are sort of Tory liberal marginal people, they are very happy with what I asked. I'm pretty cross with the Prime Minister for making a joke and not answering my question. So people can judge it, but I was actually quite happy with the impact it's had on the target audience who I was thinking about. To on your general question about how we would have managed coronavirus differently, well, I'll start off by saying we wouldn't have started from there, because it's true. Their preparations were shocking, and two levels of that. First of all, they did the simulation exercise in 2016, what's called the Cygnus exercise, and that told them an awful lot about what needed to be done, and they didn't do it. Things like, you need more ventilators, you need more critical care beds, you need more PPE, and they didn't learn the lessons of the exercise that they themselves have set up. And there's evidence that those recommendations were repeated time and again to ministers, including last year, and they ignored them. I would hope Liberal Democrats would not have done. Moreover, given that we've had a policy for some time of increasing taxes to raise more money for health and social care, I think we would be better placed. We wouldn't have had 40,000 nursing vacancies, 120,000 vacancies in the social care sector. So hopefully we would have gone in better. Put that aside for a moment, how we would have handled it. I actually think this shows that liberal values about how we think about life are better than Tories. Because Tories actually have taken a very centralised, almost Labour-like approach to managing this. Public Health England will sort out the testing laboratories. The national government will do food distribution. Will sort out through the NHS procurement all the PPE. And it's been pretty rubbish. They're putting all their eggs in the basket for some centralised app which is going to sort it all out. It won't. If you'd taken a view where you needed to work with local government, with local communities, with local businesses, with universities, I think you'd have had a much better approach. So on laboratories, you would have used labs in Britain's life sciences industry, in the universities. You'd have brought them in very early. On food distribution, you'd have left it to local government. And by the way, where that's happened, it's been really effective. Another example, school meals, for free school meals. In England, they signed this contract with this provider who's been shockingly appalling. And I've had head teachers saying, the kids aren't getting the meals, the vouchers aren't coming through, it's awful. Kirsty Williams in Wales, a Liberal Democrat minister, she refused to sign that contract and work with local authorities to make sure the meals got to those families and those children. And guess what? They're getting them. I mean, it's just an actual example in real life of how our approach would be more successful. That doesn't mean you wouldn't have some centralised learning, some centralised regulation standards and over coordination. Of course you would, but they've tried to do it all centrally, and it hasn't worked. And that's not how Germany did it. That's not how Korea did it. It's not how Denmark did it. If you look at the more successful models, so across the board, I think taking a liberal approach would have been more effective.
When Corbyn became leader of the Labour Party, a lot of store was put by his youth organisation in Momentum and the Youth Quake, which may or may not have ever materialised. What do you think of our equivalent young Liberals, its position in the party, and what we as young members of the Liberal Democrats should be doing with regards to that?
Well, I think youth wings are really important in any serious political organisation, and important in many ways, not just for what they do in campaigning themselves, but in terms of galvanising other young people, and also ensuring that those of us or those people who are in charge of any campaign understand about communicating to young people. Because one thing I wouldn't do is I wouldn't say you should put me in charge of campaigning to young people, because I don't think I'd be very good at it. And I think you need to bring in people who do understand it and understand where young people are getting their news, their views. And I think that's what Corbyn Labour did. And they brought people in more. And I think we've not done that very well. I mean, there are other things about our technology platforms being rubbish, but that's a separate issue. So the youth movement needs to be very strong in our party and have its voice heard.
We've only got a couple of minutes left, But what we normally do at the end of these is ask a couple of quick fire questions.
Okay, go for it.
I thought I'd ask you, I'll give you them all at once, and then you can take them in any order.
Okay.
First, could you give us potentially, a member of parliament from each party outside of the Liberal Democrats that you respect, the most, or who you think's pretty outstanding? And then what have your lockdown hobbies been? And finally, I've got here quite weirdly a copy of what's called To Serve a Liberal Helping, which was a cookbook that the Camden Liberal Democrats put out in 2007. And what I was wondering is, have you made any of your toad in the hole, which is the recipe that you submitted to this cookbook? So yes, those are the quick fire questions.
The last one's easiest because the answer is yes. My kids love toad in the hole. And my wife's actually not very good at doing Yorkshire puddings. And I love Yorkshire pudding. Frankly, if we have any roast meat, I like Yorkshire pudding. But you can't beat toad in the hole. So yeah, I do cook toad in the hole. I don't cook very much else, I have to say. The next question, what are the questions? What have I been my hobbies during the lockdown? Well, I've spent more time with my kids. It's been a bit frustrating because the thing we normally do together is go swimming, and we can't go swimming. And I say my little boy is quite disabled, and we're always working to get his limbs stronger, and he loves swimming, and swimming's the best thing for him. The next best thing is his tricycle, and I've had my eye on for a long time, but he was too small for it. A Italian tricycle, because he can't do a bike, he has to be a tricycle. And it's called Di Blasi, Diblasi, Di Blasi. And they do foldable trikes. You can fold it up. And so we bought one, and we've got him trained on using his bike, this tricycle, sorry. And we love going for walks with John using his Di Blasi tricycle, and then I can fold it up and put it in the back of the car. So that's probably the best thing I've done since during this time at home. And then what was the other question?
Members from the House that aren't Lib Dems.
Labour Hilary Benn. I'm a big fan of Hilary Benn. He's great on climate change. He was great on the Brexit committee. Didn't always agree with him, by the way, but I think he's really solid. And yeah, I'm a big fan of Hilary's. On the Tory side, a bit trickier now because some of the ones I used to like have now gone. So I was a big fan of Oliver Letwin. Did a lot of work with him in the coalition, and he was such an unusual Tory because he often wouldn't take the Tory line and he'd think for himself. So I really used to get on with him. I don't do much work with Tories now, to be honest. One who's not very well known, but I've always been quite impressed by him, is a guy called Hugh Merriman. I think he's Battle MP for Battle, something like that, Battle and Bexhill. But I think he's got an independent mind as well, and I like that. Is that enough? Do I have to go through the other parties?
No, thank you very much. I know I said that was my last question, but we've had about 4 people ask this same question and say,
okay, go for it.
Just back to the YL topic, some people in the party say that YL's, you mentioned the federal board, should the YL seat be removed? How should YL feed into the federal party?
Well, we've got to make sure that different voices are heard, whether they're on the federal board or not. It's not my decision about how the federal board is organised and who gets on it, but it does seem to me a no-brainer that 43 people, you can't run a board with 43 people. I don't know what the ideal size is. I would hope you'd have YL representation on it, because if you've got 15 people, you can't find a room for the voice of young people, then I think that's wrong. We need diversity, right? We need diversity by gender, by the BME community, disability, sexuality. We need diversity. But when we talk about diversity, I think one of the most significant ones that often, well, two significant ones that often get forgotten. One is age, and the other is background income in particular. You know, I think we need to think about that. But I wouldn't. The party will decide how it wants to reform the federal board, but I don't think one group can, you know, say they must have the representation. It's important that we listen to everyone, but I don't think there should be a monopoly given to any one group. Does that sort of answer your question?
Yeah, thank you very much. I'll let you go now. Thank you very much for your time.
A pleasure.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for what you guys do. If you've got any other questions, do send them to me. I'm told by my team I should tell you my email for those. So it's leader@libdems.org.uk, leader@libdems.org.uk. Happy to answer your questions. And if you remember the local party that want me to come and talk, we can try and organise it through Zoom. Good to talk to you now, and hope you survive the rest of lockdown.